So now under the Genius Act, what they're saying is the guys who own the New York Fed are all going to create subsidiaries and issue stablecoin, which will be interoperable and can work with a social credit system. Now, here's the beauty of it. The New York Fed, under the law, has direct obligations to Congress, and Congress has jurisdiction over them. If you do it through the owners of the Fed, through their private subsidiaries, you're going to have some degree of freedom. So it gives you more freedom.
Oh, my God.
Yeah. So if you think this is improvement, you have another thing coming.
A lot of people are concerned now about CBDCs. What have you observed the plan is?
I would say within the United States, a directly issued government central bank digital currency is a total red herring. And they're going to do what they always do, which is hide behind the private market and the private sector and have private capital creation through private banks continue this racket. And the main thing that people sort of are scared about with CBDCs is surveillance and programmability, and all of your data and transactions being at the whim of big government and big brother. Well, they're recreating that exact same mechanism, except instead of the public sector, it's private banks, and it's J.P. Morgan, and it's Cantor Fitzgerald. This is not an improvement in any way. The private sector actually retains a lot more rights to restrict customer access than the public sector would. So they're going to do what they always do, and use the private sector to create a completely surveillable, completely programmable digital dollar. And we will see this fight against CBDCs by the likes of DeSantis and Trump and Vivek. And there'll be this total red herring false victory as then they move into the private stablecoin system that in every single way is the CBDC, except it's not issued directly by the government.
Welcome to What's Left, a weekly political discussion challenging the mainstream left. I'm Eduardo Barca with co-host, teacher and socialist Andy Lipson and socialist Kenny Cepeda. We're online at whatsleftpodcast.com. You can find that site and that link to our site in the episode notes. You can also find my personal social media handle as always at Don Eduardo Barca. Please subscribe, rate, review, turn on your notifications, and share your favorite episode wherever you found this episode. We have merch as well, and if you fancy a shirt, contact us through our site, and Andy will be able to get back to you at whatsleftpodcast.com. All right, Kenny, you're back with us. Thank you for being back. Our team.
Just for a little bit, but I'm surprised Michael is not here.
Yeah,
but I do appreciate all the work you're all doing, and I do listen. And so thank you for continuing with the show, I guess, or I don't know what I would call it, the podcast.
Yeah. And we're going to talk about Jeffrey Epstein today. What made you choose to say, hey, I want to get involved in this?
Well, I had a little window of time available, and I just wanted to, I've been wanting to, just discuss stuff. And I think that this topic has been out there, and I think I have a few things to say, maybe contribute. So, yeah. And I'm curious as to where it's going to go, because I don't think it will go the way, in a predictable way, at least.
Well, that's basically the topic of this week's episode. It's the Jeffrey Epstein case, which we had, as Andy and I discussed on the phone, done some time before. What was it, 2019?
Yeah, it was August 2019. It was more than 5 years ago.
Right. And at that time, I think we were just a year in our podcast at that time, and we were I was figuring things out at the time, and I wasn't too sure. If anyone wants to look back at those cringy episodes back in the day, I wasn't too sure how to get right into conspiracy theories or even question things that we weren't sure about. In my case, more than anything,
my position is just of one of inquiry and making sure that we don't. I guess what I overall try to do at What's Left here is to make sure that we don't spiral into those conspiracies
There's conspiracies all the time.
with the rest of with the rest of the YouTube world. And I'm not saying I know, and I'm not saying I have a position. All I'm just trying to say is I'm making sure that we don't drift into those.
What's wrong with? Let me ask you. I'm going to ask you a question though. What's wrong with those? What's wrong with drifting into conspiracy? Conspiracy means you're being lied to.
And since then, of course, I think I've learned a lot. Especially what kicked me in the ass was 2020. So obviously, I've came around a lot to the conspiratorial realm. Excuse me. And I think the two biggest takeaways, because you asked me yesterday, Andy, what was it that I wanted to take away from the episode at the time? And I think two things was, obviously, I just mentioned it now, it was how far I come, my evolution in all of this. And the reason why I don't mind leaving anything up there, as I always say, as cringy as it is because I think people need to use real life examples or look at other people who are in the, in the kind of commentary world of critics or just political sphere to see how we, it's all right to change your mind. It's all right to make mistakes, and you are going to, say things that you might look back on and you say, oh, I can't believe I stood by that. I say this because I was on another. I've been on another podcast, and then that podcast, one of the things I realized with my other co-host was the biggest thing that I just don't feel there's honesty in this conversation. And I so value honesty, and I value now the importance of being real and authentic. And I have less and less and less and less edited our episodes over the years.
Yep.
That to the point where you just minimally edit a few things, a sentence here or two, but I don't even edit anymore because I think I honor that. So that's one of the biggest takeaways, right?
And can I say something about that, Eduardo? Because it was really interesting to rewatch it as for me as well. And as much as you cringed for you, I cringed for me a little bit because I felt like I was a bit of a bully almost, trying to force something on you. And you were saying you can't force this on me. So I was like, oh man, why am I such a jerk?
And
do you know why he was placed on suicide watch?
Why was he?
Because there was a murder attempt on him. Now they said, oh, he tried to commit suicide. But even people who were around him said, no, somebody tried to kill him on the 23rd of July.
The 23rd of July, he was he was unconscious.
Right.
Yet, and he doesn't even recall many things as well.
Well, there are people around him at the time who actually reported that he was afraid for his life.
But all right, yeah. And then he was placed on suicide watch, yes. And then he was taken off suicide watch.
Why?
Yeah.
Why?
And what I'm doing right now is I'm just going through what I know,
mm-hmm.
and what I realize difference here is that I'm too afraid to fill in the gaps for something I don't know if we have conclusive evidence for.
So you're going to let the mainstream media fill in the gaps then? You're going to let the government fill in the gaps for you? Because that's what's happening.
No.
That's what's happening. If you think you have evidence, because you were going to ask me to produce evidence, and I just did, and these are the ones that actually make the most sense out of what happened. I'm not afraid of doing that because they do it all the time.
And when we discussed we were going to do this episode, I told you I was going to press you on it, and
right.
and I'm glad you're providing.
And I'm pressing you on what's your evidence for believing that.
I don't hold a position.
Well, then I do. So if you hold a position, you have nothing to say. And people should go back and watch it. But I think the thing that I was running up against that you were saying is at that time you were afraid to let the door in on all these people who believe conspiracies because I think it was like it would discredit you and things like that. And I think that has been the biggest shift is that you are no longer a person who will try to hold back the door on people who have the idea of a conspiracy.
In the same way, I'm just because I've decided to question you doesn't mean that all of a sudden I am in alliance with the FBI, the CIA, and the mainstream media. Doesn't mean that, Andy. It means that even within us, with our disagreements, I will question you.
Right.
and I will put you
But you're
on the hot spot or
Right.
on spotlights.
Right. And here's the difference, is that I embrace and welcome my brothers and sisters who believe in all those conspiracies. I see them as brothers and sisters.
No.
Right. That's a difference.
Not me.
That's a difference.
For
because
our listeners, I'm putting my hand up.
Agreed.
But dividing us.
Right. And this is our difference, Eduardo. This is our difference. The reason I embrace my brothers and sisters, I may not agree with all the different conclusions, is that I have more in common with them because they're not just going to listen to mainstream nonsense and believe it's true.
This
they
YouTube
hold on.
video is now going to be demoted.
We don't get monetized anyway. But those are people who have been lied to, and they know they're being lied to, and they're trying to look for the truth. And sometimes, just like I have, you go down rabbit holes. I've done it before. I'll do it again. I think dark matter is a rabbit hole. I've told students last year that dark matter was legit. I have to take that back now. I think there's lots of reason to question it. Okay? So unfortunately, I bought it.
Because I was frustrated at the time. I remember that I laid out all the evidence for why I was like, this guy was murdered. He was not. He didn't commit suicide. And you were doing a devil's advocate, and I was like, no, you can't. Like there's no. You're just giving me mainstream talking points, kind of thing. And but I think maybe whether you were doing that or not, you were really clear and you were honest about this. Is like, I'm not letting these conspiracies. In fact, I remember you holding your hand up and saying, I'm not going to let these conspiracies in. And that clearly has been a big change.
Yeah, I suppose, can you go right? I just suppose I wanted some legitimacy by the world that we weren't going to delve into something that we were unsure of, or at least I was unsure of. So go ahead, Kenny.
I know it's amazing to see the evolution, and I think, I also looked at that episode, and yes, I cringe at moments, but then I remember when I joined, a little after that episode, I think, I guess the biggest notable thing for me is that there was one screen. Like, we were in the same room. Now we've gotten so accustomed to this, that.
Yeah.
But no, like, we would get together. I know you guys started this whole thing, and actually be in a room, and face to face discussing. And I just want to say personally that I commend Eduardo for being the most courageous, perhaps, of all of us here, because you have stood on the fire, taking shit sometimes from both of us. And, with your point of view, your vantage point, you just hold, and you demonstrated that in that episode, that you didn't just believe, you wanted to kind of know and understand. And, and like, I would have disagreed with you on that episode too. But again, I've done my evolution, but I think you are the greatest example of what I think needs to happen. People do need to stand on their conviction, even if you're wrong, and then evolve, and you have to take your own journey. You cannot let people convince you just because, you took your own journey, and you took your own experience, and you've learned your own lessons, as I have too, and I think it's going to come up in this episode. But I just wanted to say thank you, because you held the fort. You've been the alternative in this, I guess, in this space. And so it's great to see that.
Yeah, you exemplified the very thing that maybe you're not seeing in your friend Jake. I feel like you have exemplified that honest actor and honest participant in this podcast all the whole time, and that is really I agree with Kenny that it takes a lot of courage, and particularly to just allow that to be like, okay, 4 or 5 years later, I could be I'm saying a different thing. It's really something else.
I mean, I think it's what is tough is your ego, and what people don't want to do. And most people have developing ideas privately, but when you expose yourself week after week and try to figure and make sense of the world in front of a public, even if it's 20 people or 100 people and then 1,000 subscribers, it's tough. It's tough to be exposed that way, and you feel naked, and you see yourself in your development. And because I'm already, I write and I love to share my life, I'm going to leave it there. But I want people to, biggest takeaway is, it's fine, it's all right, you can be wrong, there's nothing wrong here, don't let your ego get so in the way, and we all have it. So, people make up their minds privately, but they can also make up their minds publicly.
And I want to add one other thing that I didn't realize until now. So during that episode, I was like, I'll summarize, you're just giving me FBI talking points. That's kind of what I was saying, because the FBI crafted the whole idea of a conspiracy back in the 60s as a means of discrediting people who were like saying anti-government stuff. But the thing I really didn't talk about, and I really should have when I was saying this, is both Eduardo and I come from a left that has done the very same thing. And it's not just Democracy Now!, it's socialists, sometimes anarchists and stuff like that. We come from a tradition which rejects conspiracy because we want to be mainstream, we want to be accepted. And that was the thing that I feel like I really missed in that episode. Ironically, we're about what's left, we're criticizing left, and I completely missed that because Eduardo was triggering me by talking about Democracy Now! He noted that, and I missed the point of that, which is it's not just Democracy Now! It would be Socialist Worker that wouldn't say such a thing. So I feel like whether that would have changed your mind or not, I feel like that was something I really missed in that episode.
I just want to add one last thing, that I feel that obviously that was early on, right, in the progression of this podcast. And I feel that along the way, right, a million things have happened, events in the world, things that affected us personally, right? Like Eduardo has shared a number of personal experiences, as have I, and yourself, Lipson. But I think that the biggest thing that I take is a confirmation of what we've argued, right, at times, about building trust through going through shit, basically, and like maybe we weren't organizing completely together in a physical space, which we believe it's important, right? But I think that now, 5 years later, right, there is a level of trust in understanding the other person, because I guess I would say you two stuck through those differences, and there was a level of trust that you said you've talked about this in the past, and that that didn't get destroyed by having differences.
Yeah.
And this is, again, I think that's why this is important, that people can see that episode and see now and see a difference in the transition, because everyone's evolved. Not just Eduardo. You have Lipson, right, and your approach to things, and so I think it's beautiful, and I'm proud and honored to be part of this, and hopefully to keep it going.
Yeah, thank you.
We need you back. At least bi-weekly. Anyhow.
And you had a second thing you wanted to say.
Yeah, the second thing was how I think I give credit to you, Andy, because you had at the time brought up the topic. You said you wanted to cover it. And this is before. We're not just jumping on any bandwagon here. This is something that we've already covered in the past as it's archived, which is the reason why sometimes I get upset with you, Andy, when you want to do something with YouTube and then everything's going to go away. But everything's on what's left podcast.com, everyone.
That's right.
And so, just picking at Andy, as always. So as I just mentioned, I think the important thing here is that we're not covering this because it's just relevant. We're covering it because there is a systematic cover-up that is happening that no one is paying attention to, maybe now more so, and maybe at some points, but consistently we have to look at that there's an elite class, a real ruling class at the top that is covering up real sketchy things, and no one sees that. And so when I say no one, of course, I'm kind of being like, I'm exaggerating. Of course, people do, but why isn't it highlighted in the mainstream media? Why aren't we bringing this up constantly? Why aren't we actually after the real criminals instead of people that are day-to-day laborers, immigrants, being called criminals, deporting them, dehumanizing them, and and being distracted by the immigration policies that are being placed by this administration and past administration as well, by the Biden administration. But anyhow, so I thought that was important to bring up, that we're it's like a saga, right? We should be covering this up constantly.
Yeah, and one things there were things that I said there that I had kind of forgotten that so much of Jeffrey Epstein's connections when he was living was actually, he was very deeply connected with the Democratic Party, like more with the Democratic Party possibly than the Republican Party, in terms of his associations. And also, like, I didn't remember that characters like Mohammed bin Salman, who was the leader of Saudi Arabia, was, and he's not even talked about anymore right now. But the thing that was so meaningful to me at the time, and I remember it reminded me of like the scene from Eyes Wide Shut, when there's this ruling class that has these wearing masks and have orgies and just, it's depraved and also abusive and things like that. But in Eyes Wide Shut, these aren't with children; these are with adult women, but sex workers and things like that, but they're using them. And what was so chilling was the developing notion that there is this dark underbelly to the way the capitalist class operates, in which it uses pedophilia and blackmail as a means of controlling people, and as a mechanism for forcing people to do things they want, and also training them, like hazing them, also into that. So I started to really come to believe that these secret societies have a real function within capitalist society, and there is dark shit that they're involved in. And Jeffrey Epstein exposed that the part of that, of the way that the capitalist class controlled itself. And the one piece I emphasize so much, the CIA and NSA and FBI, I don't think I knew at the time how many connections were associated with Mossad. And so that was one thing I left out as well. So that his connections to not just, I think CIA and Mossad are probably the deepest ones that made him such a useful target or useful tool for the capitalist class to control itself with.
Just a quick footnote, I guess, on the theme of conspiracy theories, because I ran into in doing research for this or whatever, just watching stuff, reading stuff. I don't remember where I saw it, but there is a conspiracy theory that says that Stanley Kubrick died because of this movie in particular.
I've heard
because it actually exposed, something of the inner workings of power, and so, yeah.
And yes, and one other thing is, if the capitalist class, the media, will always say we're doing this to stop child pornography or the exploitation of children. It's that every time they say that, that's a complete lie, because there's much of their control mechanism amongst each other is all pedophilia rings and sex rings and things like that. So, like, these people don't care. Like, they cannot be believed for an ounce of anything that they say they're doing to protect children, because they are. I mean, I really do believe children's, like, sexual abuse and blood is shed because of these people and their depravity, and their willingness to make people do things or to encourage people to do things so they can control them. It's disgusting.
Yeah. Right.
So, who decided this episode to discuss this today? Was it you, Lipson, Eduardo? And I'm kind of curious as to, why, because, just from my vantage point, like, I'm very suspicious. I've always mentioned this, right? When something gets talked about and, it has it's part of the news cycle, and this was for a second, right? And I do see what you're saying, Eduardo. It doesn't get the outrage, perhaps, that you think, maybe it deserves. But I come from the coming into this, I'm a little suspicious as to why this still has legs, in the sense that, in the past, since Biden, Trump, there's been a lot of scandals, right? A lot of shit that has happened, and I mean, I'm horrified about this, right? But what I'm trying to say is that there's been other major political events with political consequences, right? At least discussed in that way, that haven't panned out, right? Like Trump was impeached, Biden pardoning his son, and a bunch of shit like that. So I am I'm coming into this very doubtful as to why it's on the news, actually, and why it's actually getting coverage, and I actually think, it's a bit of a show, because of the dumb shit that is happening, that you think someone who holds on to power would cover their bases, and it's kind of ridiculous the way they're putting the crumbs out there, perhaps. So that's kind of where I'm coming from right now. But I'm curious as to why you wanted to talk about this, Eduardo.
I think, well, as we mentioned, I think that the relevancy that we have in the past, that's first. And then there's the other part too, which is my take on, since my commentary on, since we've last done that episode, because at that episode, it was a back and forth argument about not wanting me to be positioned to any one place. And now I do have a clear position as to where I stand on this. And lots of questions that have remained unanswered, such as who did Epstein work for, or whether blackmail was used, and which intelligence agencies may have been involved. I think those are the areas that I'd like to figure out over time, maybe not in this episode, but as things get unfolded. And yeah, I mean, there is also the fact that you're saying that this might be a big smokescreen. Something might be happening that they're trying to put in front of us that is not actually the news that we should be covering. So I think I appreciate that vantage point that you always bring to this to what's left at Kenny, that we should be paying attention to maybe what's not being said when too much of it is being covered. So there might be something else that, Andy, you might want to bring up.
I wanted to cover it, but I kind of like, people will note that the opening of this episode has nothing to do with Epstein. It talks about stablecoin and the Genius Act, and we're going to get to that. But I got caught up in this. Like, I didn't get caught up in this because, this shows once again that Jeffrey Epstein was murdered and not that he killed himself. That I knew all along. What I got caught up in this, and essentially also fell for kind of going away from the main story that was hidden underneath this, which I think is is part of what's happening, was the drama of watching the Trump's MAGA base.
I was going to say that too.
Scramble around this, because they had been disappointed by him not stopping the war in Ukraine, and they had been disappointed with the big beautiful bill. They had been disappointed with blowing up Iran, attacking Iran, and like chip by chip by chip. And so what I've been paying attention to has been more like what's happening at the base, because I've often, we made this comparison about the Obama hopium days compared to the Trump hopium days. And as you and me, and Eduardo know, people never got over Obama. They stayed in love with him the whole time, no matter what he did. And he betrayed people as bad as not worse than Trump. Yet, in one level, Trump's betrayals, which he goes right in their face and say, "Oh, what are you talking about, Epstein? I never said anything about that." And it's like, if you want to talk about Epstein, you're not even part of me anymore. And it's like, honestly, I got caught up in that. I was like, oh my God, this guy is like, what is going on? And what seemed meaningful to me is to pay attention to whether or not his base was going to go for it or not. I don't really know how to assess it. I can tell you that my brother and my sister, who were all in on Trump for the most, or pretty heavy in on Trump, are like done. They're done with the guy. They're like, well, my brother is, and he's like, I don't make excuses for this guy anymore. It's like, and so that's meaningful to me. And when I talked to John Kleisick, Jake, he's like, yes, there are people out on YouTube who will say they're switching Dave Smith and things like that. He goes, I don't pay attention to any of those people because I don't know, all of them could be having an angle of some sort, And you did hear people like Candace Owens and Dave Smith basically say, I'm done with Trump, kind of at one level, at some level, kind of. And I got caught up in that as well. So for me, I think I was tracking the popular response to this to see if it indicated that there's a break and maybe a break away from the uniparty and things like that. Frankly, I think I'm overstating the possibilities of it, because again, people can still find their way to swing all the way back. And I do think I feel like there might be something else going on, but this was kind of a show that distracted the freedom movement, the MAGA base, from what I think were other moves, which is like I'm suggesting, the Genius Act being passed once and for all. Remember, like everyone's saying, well, we're gonna have this vote that forces the either the House of Representatives or the Senate to vote on whether or not to discuss the Epstein things, and the Congress made sure to recess before that vote was had. But they definitely didn't. They made sure that in that same time, both in the Senate and in the House of Representatives, the Genius Act passed. And the Genius Act is going to bring us much closer to what you heard about in the beginning of this episode, a central bank digital currency, or a privately run central bank digital currency being enacted in this country. And that's all happening under the nose of people while all of us are sniffing around this Jeffrey Epstein thing.
I think you bring that the part about the MAGA base, I think, is important too, because the reason why I went on to another podcast, Bantercast Live, with Jacob, my buddy over there, was because I wanted to have a connection to that audience, to MAGA, to the Trump supporters. And you're right, Andy. They are just as disciple following as the Obama supporters. So, at what point will they open their eyes or have a 2020, breakup with their party if they don't see what's actually happening? The Elon Musk breakup, the so many incomplete promises, or just failed promises, that the Trump and his sons were asking for these Jeffrey Epstein files to be released, and all the people around him, his minions, were saying, release these files, and suddenly it's what, who, when, where, and Truth Social, and forget that Epstein, and then all of a sudden the commentary is just, you look at Truth Social, and you have all the MAGA folks saying, why, we're not going to forget about this, holding him accountable to it. I think there's something to say about that. That's the other side over there of the working class that we need to stay in touch with, that I think people tell me and encourage me to leave them behind. And it's like they're lost or deplorables,
I guess what comes to mind for me is that, yes, the Trump base, I guess classic, he was the one who, before all of us, said that Trump was going to win, right, the election. And in retrospect, right now, it makes sense, right, because the Trump base was the most problematic base. We had talked about the left, the Democratic base, as, I literally said this, like, that the party tells them, fuck you, you're going to vote for us regardless of what we do. And so they and people were going to vote because, you had to vote the party line, and, because it's anyone but Trump, right? And so the Democrats are already in the bag. And so what I see now is the opposite, like that the people who voted for Trump, we've all discussed this, that the ballot box is where your political energy goes to die. Mm-hmm. Once you voted, it's a sign of capitulation. It's a sign of surrendering. It's a sign that you're believing that this fucking system can change anything, and so you're done. And they can do whatever the fuck they want. We talk about a lot of especially the America First bullshit. They talk about laws. They talk about justice. They talk about morality. This bullshit that doesn't really play in power. That's not how power works. They'll give you what enough just to keep you in line, enough to not make sure people get riled up. But I guess what I'm saying is that it's been a wrap. So even this Epstein thing, it's just, for me, it's just more stringing it along. It's another carrot, to keep some of the base still clinging on, even though I believe nothing's going to happen. I mean, like, the January 6th thing, it's completely done. We don't even talk about it anymore, which would have been something significant, right? That showed the potential for actual change. And so again, I go back to this whole Epstein thing, and I only see it as more smoking screen and mirrors, right? More just stay attached to this reality TV, which Trump is the king of. He knows how to make a show. That's his brand. Outrageous shit. American TV trash, basically. And so he's an expert at this, and that's what I feel is happening with this case right now, with the clumsy things that are being let out. Because the way I see it is like, yes, there are secret societies. Yes, there are organizations, people that conspire. Right, this is where conspiracy theory comes from, where they conspired against the masses to maintain their lot in society. And so in order to let us see into that little window, this is one aspect, that this is one of their dirty sides that we suspect, right? But like having evidence, right, like that will materialize something in a different way than having a suspicion. So they're allowing us to see this. They're stringing this shit along in a clumsy way, because I just don't believe that these people who have run a sex trafficking circle for 20 plus years, at least since we know, right? That's at least close to 20 years. And now we're getting this, oh, look at that. They're allowing us to see some crumbs that like confirm our suspicions, but that's gonna become nothing. Like, yeah, you will feel some sort of, oh, I was right, or look at them, and indignation, right? But then what? But then what? And the biggest thing, I guess this is one of the things I want to emphasize, that in the last 5 years, right, the biggest lesson that I've learned going through, all the changes in the world, was the realization of how profound, how efficient the propaganda system is to convince us of shit that we think we know. In masses of people, and I'm not just talking about the COVID vaccine, because we had people who opposed that shit, right? And now they were eating the whole immigration thing. And I'm not just talking about the left, the right wingers. I'm also talking about the Jimmy Dores, all his slots, and a lot of the other people, whatever, the likes, that were railing against immigrants. They bought that whole thing about safe, better immigration. And so I'm just tying the massive mindfuck that we're all subjected to every day to the Epstein case right now, that they're allowing us to see. That's why I'm very skeptical as to why we're even talking about this shit. Not because we don't care, because I don't believe justice comes through this quote unquote justice system. And the biggest perpetrators of this filth, they're protected. Some might fall, some, in some Machiavellian shit, some people have to be thrown under the bus, but the whole system is going to stay intact. And all we're doing is watching some reality TV bullshit.
Yeah, I start to think as you were talking, you just reminded me of things we've said before, which is, wait, the thing you get to see is the thing they're allowing you to see. Remember that, so you have to ask, why are they letting you see that? Why are they, and when we see how much of the surveillance grid and the digital surveillance grid is being dropped under Trump, I don't even know if this is going to be their control mechanism in the going future. Like the way that they used to do this with Epstein Island and things like that, maybe they're not going to do it. And I want to play one thing here with what's her name, Catherine Austin Fitts, in the beginning, because here's what she says here.
Was put in by the bankers to get the control grid. The other team in the Uniparty wasn't moving fast enough. They couldn't get the control grid.
I knew it.
I sent you a link. We just did a new collection of all the things Trump is doing to move the control grid. He is moving very, very fast.
She goes on to more Real ID, and she doesn't talk about Immigration OS, but she talks about a bunch of other things: Real ID, the stable coin, Immigration OS. I would say the Doge centralization, What are some other? I think the big one. Oh, and Stargate AI. Is a big feature of, like, I think she even calls it Stargate AI. That Stargate thing for the AI, she considers it Warp Speed 2.0, Operation Warp Speed 2.0. So that is really the story of Trump, and all of us have been confused. Like, even the left people, when they talk about Doge, they talk about people getting job cuts. But no, it was centralizing data. So again, so that Palantir could do the thing it's going to do on immigration, and then they're doing a thing on immigration, so they can create a vast surveillance network around the whole country. And then, of course, they talk about the Golden Dome that they're going to build, which is just a satellite network they're not going to. They know that they can't stop hypersonic missiles, and they know you can just overwhelm these systems. So it's a surveillance system. So it's that distraction. I do think that there's another piece that has been put in place with the Genius Act now, and now it's just waiting for Trump to sign, which he might have already done. I don't know, because I haven't followed it since July 18th, which is my birthday. That was my birthday, when it passed in the Congress or in the House of Representatives. So it this. Yeah, I think the real Epstein story should have been, if we were following it right, should have been, don't fall for that. Don't fall for the cheese. The actual trap is the Genius Act.
And just wanted to add one more thing real quick to this whole tech, being pushed by Trump. I was mentioning earlier that he had an announcement today. So he announced a new health tracking system. All right, so talk about data collection, surveillance. Talk about make America healthy again, right? And so yes, like, he's been very efficient in pushing a lot of tech stuff into our lives.
Unregulating AI recently, a new legislation, and
That's part of the big beautiful bill was deregulating AI. Yeah,
or deregulate. Is it unregulating or deregulating?
both. I mean, it's basically you can't stop it. Basically, you can't restrict it.
No, I was looking for a recent podcast where I was listening to how much all the databases are being, just as you say, Andy, are being connected onto one interface, so that it's just a way to surveillance the entire country. And the other thing too, I was just going to mention is this, well, not in this episode, but at some other episode, I was going to talk about. I wanted to bring up this Golden Dome, because you hear about the dome that's in Israel, and suddenly Trump wants his Golden Dome, golden, of course, and and here you're bringing it up, and that's right. It is a bunch of satellites that's going to try to protect the USA, but really, as we've covered, and as I mentioned about, I think it was 2 episodes back with Jay, about the level of surveillance that's going to be on the entire country in smart cities, using those satellites that are being used in my country, in Mexico, where I'm at currently, in Ciudad Juárez, where the entire city is now being surveillanced at every micro minute. Because of, under the guise of protection and security, and trying to promote this idea that we need more security to take care of the people. So it's being tried in other countries, and it's going to be taken over, because the very same, just for a little background, the very same system that is being used as a project in a smart city, Ciudad Juárez, was by an ex-official of the military that has mapped it out in Ciudad Juárez. They're trying to do that too. So it's just getting more and more advanced. And like we've mentioned in the past, and I'll keep saying, all the AI developing centers are at the border and in the military. So.
And I guess I would add that, again, reiterating that this is not just a Trump thing, right? Like in that video that you showed, Lipson, the lady says that the other side was being too slow, right? And the U.S. ruling class has to move fast, because they're playing a catch-up game, right? We've argued that. I don't know if we're still, in that position. But yes, in the context of a challenge to its hegemony in the world, right? By China, Russia, and other others trying to get a bigger piece of the pie. And so, yes, there is a need to accelerate. In the past, we've argued that COVID was an enormous acceleration, right, of all this stuff that we is so normal in our lives. Like, for example, AI, right? Like before to 2020, like, yeah, it was in the background, but it's not in our face like as it is
Yeah.
now.
Yeah.
And we've talked about how huge amounts of data is necessary to train these systems. And what better time than to put people behind screens, right, to try to collect this data and train the systems. And what better time to push people towards virtual learning and virtual podcast recording, and all this stuff. But again, in the context of an escalating war, right? Because we talk about possible war with China, but they're already at war, right? There's already an economic war. There's different spheres where this war is taking place. In the head-on collision hasn't happened yet, but in many ways, they're already battling for supremacy, right? And China has shown more aggressiveness in like a longer period in their project in inserting so much technology, surveillance technology into sectors of the Chinese population. And so in that context is where Trump is very, very efficient at advancing what the liberals couldn't do, right?
Yeah, and inoculating the U.S. capitalist class from the resistance that they would face from the more conservative forces, because they're not facing much resistance from liberal forces. I think it's important that you brought up Russia and China, because I do believe the United States is playing catch up in terms of data collection and developing the effective CBDC, which in this case looks like it's going to be stable coin in the United States. Russia already has a digital currency already going. China is already operating on it, or starting some version of it. And again, there are people who would say that the alternative to the U.S. model is the Chinese model or the Russian model, and all these clowns are doing the same thing. None of them are developing this for the liberation of their societies and for the enrichment of humanity. They are doing it for the same greedy reasons that our capitalists are doing it. Basically to super exploit their own population and control their population. And they will have to do even more of that as they gear up for war. So that part, I think, also has to just be emphasized, is there's no way out of here other than stopping your own country from going forward in this. And that's again, revolution in the United States. It would have to be one in China, one in Russia. This isn't going to happen from somebody winning a war or defeating its economic competitor and the US losing and China and Russia imposing multipolar peace. They are also building their own control grids, and they are in a more advanced stage than the United States.
Eduardo?
No, go ahead.
Just want to kind of bring it back to the Epstein thing, files, right? That's what's being pushed around, the Epstein files, whatever. But this is because I always wonder, right? Like, are they united? Is there really fights in the ruling class? But then I remember that the way I understand, power in general, is that these are the biggest mobsters, in the world. The most violent, ruthless motherfuckers out there, in order to get to the places that they're at. There are names that we don't even know. Like that they don't get the cameras in front of them who are pulling strings. And yes, there is conflict. There is disagreements in some aspects, right? And there is potential for cracks. And some people have to go sometimes. And but again, this is where Epstein is key, right? And Puff Daddy or P Diddy, who we're not talking about, right? But these two types, right, who gather shit on people, set people up, which is straight up fucking, from spy movies, right?
Yeah.
And it's funny because I saw this former quote unquote CIA agent that went to the Joe Rogan podcast. This motherfucker didn't say shit. He was only deflecting to, oh, this is something that the Russians do. This is something that others need to do, but we don't do it. When in fact, the U.S. probably created a handbook for this shit.
Yeah.
And like Pompeo famously said in a panel, right, where he's like, we lie, cheat, and steal.
Yeah, the CIA taught us to lie, cheat, and steal.
And so CIA, in the past, I've heard people talk about as the most criminal branch of the U.S. government, right? Like they're in charge of doing the black shit that you don't even see the budget on the fucking $1 trillion military budget. That's the shit that we see, but there's money flying in ways we don't even know.
Mm-hmm.
But again, Epstein, and the likes, that's where they get people in line. This is how they maintain secrecy. They maintain people in a system, right? Because it's no different than plata o plomo, the lead or like a bullet or money that the Colombian cartels or the Mexican cartels, it's not different than that either. You become part of the system. We got shit on you. We all have shit to lose. We can all go down, or we take you out, and type of shit. And so these are the mechanisms that are enforced, to have some sort of unity in movement and in complicity. I guess complicity is a better word, in guiding a system to benefit them and maintaining order. And so that's why I think it's important. And I think people suspect that, right? Like I think that's what this has the potential to outrage, and it has outraged people. But again, then what? Like outrage enough is not enough.
Yeah, I don't think outrage enough. I think the important, maybe the area that I would love for people to really think about and reflect on is how much of their time and energy they are, as maybe even I was once, to invested into a system that you think that works for you when it doesn't. And when you have key players imposing systems, taking powerful roles in the government, such as Palantir, and and the list of names that we know up until now, that I think suffice for us to know that even if they released more, it's what happens at these very high level games. So the importance of just not just outrage, but stepping back, moving away from trusting the government. I think we can continue to have that that message shared on What's Left.
I just want to emphasize, sorry, that I want to say to, in that same stream, that this shit happens, and even if some people go down, even if some names are out there and they're destroyed publicly, they still have control of the system, of what goes out. And in this fucking Machiavelli 101, they're gonna have to throw some people under the fucking bus to keep going and quell the thirst of the peasants, I guess. Mm-hmm. And so justice will not come through their fucking systems, whether it's voting, the legal shit, appealing to them, even protests. I'm very cynical about that now. It's gonna come through challenging power, and that's a whole different thing than what we're doing so far. And staying outraged, rightly so, right? Because I was having this conversation about Palestine, right, with my partner, and it's like, to me, that too is what they allow you to see, because there is huge numbers of people dying every day, violently brutalized, with hunger, that go beyond Palestine. And yes, you have the right to be outraged of that, but that's just one fucking window that they allow you to see and to play you, not to fucking, and to play your emotions, really, your feelings, because they know that people care, and so they're willing to let you see something in order to keep you entertained while they do something else.
Yeah, I think one of the illusions that's existed in the conspiracy area has been if people knew this whole thing would come down. They said that about 9/11. In some ways, they said it about the JFK files, right? If people knew about JFK, then people would just like freak out and they would break. And I think the same attachment has been made to this thing. And I do believe the CIA murdered JFK, maybe with the help of the mafia, but people knowing about it doesn't take the system down. I mean, yes, it took years, but we're hearing about it. But here they are. People are like, okay, I guess that's how it happened. And I think more and more people know that the U.S. government is responsible for bringing down the towers. And again, I'm not going to say it's common knowledge, but I will say common knowledge. It could be, maybe it will be common knowledge in 15, 20 years. And there it is, very cynical government, but that was then. And the same thing is here. As long as they're able to retain power, they will be able to manage the information. And like what you're saying, Kenny, they'll even use the spectacle as a tool of diversion. And the real thing that will take these people down is us doing something that builds something of our own. And that is I'm not going to just call it in opposition to them, but builds it in the interest of humans and workers. If that's what's going to have to happen, and then there will have to be a clash between those systems, and the human system will have to win out over this system, which I would call the capitalist system, and that is the only way change is going to happen. That's fundamental, and I think people are believing that there might be some information or ideological shortcuts that can make their side weaker and possibly galvanize our side. But it isn't people's eyes being opened about the government that is the big deficit. Is the fact that I think people's eyes are going to have to be opened that we could build our own society if we trusted each other and weren't just dividing ourselves in the way that we see with immigrants and the way we see with racism and nationalism and China versus the United States and blah blah blah. So I guess those are thoughts that are in my head.
And I don't know if you had like you wanted to discuss more of the details, of what's being said, but I just want to say that that's the reason I have looked into it just to kind of just taking a little deep dive because I don't want to waste my time on that because I from the beginning I'm like this is a fucking trap because that's again citing COVID when they're pushing some shit citing COVID and a million other things when they're pushing some shit in your mouth is because they're trying to distract you. When there is like uniformity in what they're covering, and so on top of that, my cynicism of the system, right? Like, and like my suspicions that that's not justice. Justice will come in a different way, and so that's why I haven't bothered to go, to talk about Pam Bundy and and the FBI releasing some fucking video that had some minutes fucking missing and the ridiculous shit that it's like, come on, dude. If you're like that also gives some people who think that are ruling class stupid ammunition to keep throwing to think that they're throwing shit at the rulers to think that they are sloppy. You see that they cannot rule us, they cannot guide us, they cannot win anything because that's also a facade. Like they're winning, bro. Like they're up there, they still have you by the balls. Like even us, like we end up no one is above the machinery of propaganda that they spew, and it's a constant battle. Like we've had to change our opinions at times because we realize we are regurgitating shit that came from the deep depths of the deep state in the true power. John Classic has talked about, Alison McDowell has talked about, and that this is not new either. It's just that the effectiveness, the what do you call when like you go deeper into something, the ground that they're able to cover in a more precise way is scary now with technology. because it's individualized now.
Mhm.
And not only that, but reality it's obscure with all this shit. With technology, we think we're fucking finding out information when we Google shit, but you're being shown what you're more than ever before. You're being shown what you're supposed to see.
Mhm.
One thing that I wanted to share was how the case has been politicized by both administrations, and how even the most pressing questions that, as I said in the very beginning of the episode, was where is this wealth, or who has he worked for, which hasn't been actually stated by anybody. We don't know exactly the I mean, there are people that assume that Jeffrey Epstein was connected to the intelligence agencies. However, it would be fascinating to know exactly for whom. We know that there are Israeli ties. And so maybe that's the only thing left for me to say here in this episode, which is to say that there are, again, this connection and the tie between Israel and the USA is so strong because Epstein was in Israel before and has lived there. And so the connection is that we see more and more of, and we don't even know if Israel has actually atomic bombs because they haven't actually disclosed that, right? The threat of the world are the USA, NATO, Israel, and it just shows another uncovering of how strong Israel is involved with U.S.-American relations. And so I thought that was the one thing I wanted that was left to say.
And I think if I get the message that I think we're delivering in this episode is, so some of the stuff for you was like, is he a Mossad agent? Is he a CIA agent? Some of the questions for me were like, what's happening with the MAGA base? But the real thing that I think should have been happening is, what is the story behind this story? What is the story that this whole thing is meant to obscure? And that, I think, is probably the deeper question we're going to have to ask ourselves each time we get stories like this. Because I think that's fair for me to ask, okay, what's going to happen to the MAGA base? But in a sense, I got distracted. I got caught up in something that doesn't really take me anywhere because it obscures a more meaningful story. I think is, why is the ruling class putting this thing in front of my face, and what is it hiding behind it? And that's honestly, it was when Patty and then Jeff put it on his Lockdown Times. Patty, who was from San Diego, she sent out that article that said, "Oh, by the way, Genius Act is coming through is passing." And like, wait, central bank digital currency in another name is coming right through the door while all this is taking place, and no one's saying anything about it. I mean, I don't think that's the only thing that's being obscured, but more likely than not, when everyone's covering that thing, something's being obscured, and that is what I think I have to remind myself of at moments like this.
And I want to be bold and say that this whole thing about Epstein with the Mossad is also for me more part of the show, more part of the bullshit, because it doesn't fucking matter. You're right, Eduardo. But I go beyond and say that there is not just ties. The Israeli military is a branch of the U.S. government. Like they do not function without the U.S. Period. The Israeli military, they do not function without the U.S. And this bullshit that they're influencing America has a lot of lack of understanding of power and what the role of Israel is in the region. And it has been historically really in the region. And so it doesn't matter if he was a Mossad agent, like that's just another subdivision of the same. And actually, it's plausible deniability, right? If he's a Mossad agent, not a CIA agent, like who gives a fuck? Like they're all, like they're all playing the dirty games. And what if he was Noriega, like playing both sides? He was just making money out of both sides, and still part of the same fucking world.
I will say that there was a real segment of the population, U.S. American public, that does follow what is in trending. And I, in my experience with the other podcasts and on Bantercast Live, find myself sucked into following what is trending and not looking at other angles that are being discussed here on What's Left, which, having you back, Kenny, gives us that spice to look at those other angles, because at Bantercast Live, the biggest criticism that I feel like I will share, and because I did an episode on it, is that there is so much that I would talk about, that we discuss here on What's Left, that is important and that we're seeing, that is not the focus, that is not desired to discuss, because it's all dismissed, and there isn't a real dialogue about why would even bring those things up. And so if we were to invite my former co-host onto this show, he would say that we've digressed completely and we haven't actually covered the trending topic, because all of this is not actually that important as what is to be discussed that is being covered. And although I would say that he would shy away from even discussing Epstein or Elon Musk and Trump's breakup, because it doesn't benefit his idol. But that's what I'm saying. So back here, I'm glad we are bringing up the other issues that should be covered behind everything else that is being mostly conventionally being discussed in the mainstream.
And I guess that's a mistake that we have, I think, in traditionally on the left, I guess, or I don't know, but just this idea, and you were hinting at it, Lipson, or that if only they knew, if only people know, that's not enough. Like the biggest lesson for me was going through COVID and trying to oppose it and seeing the fucking leash getting tightened around my fucking neck and having, personal consequences that will never leave, my life. And like, I'll remember that shit, and staying on principle, right? Standing on principle, despite, the masses and friends, right? Losing friends that we thought we'd agreed with. That to me is really what the learning happens. So it takes doing, right? It's gonna take doing something rather than theorizing and even talking about it, and so once we go through shit, and I think people will have to go through their own journey, like you did, and like I have, and because I went to Obama's inauguration, for fuck's sake, like I was there, and then but here I am, and but it's taken a number of lessons and inquiries of my own. That's the other thing, right? Taking the intellectual part of doing this shit on your own hands, and having your own questions and standing like you have, on the fire and exposing and being honest as much as you can, right? And seeing where that lands and what you learn, because that is where the growth has come for me, and changing my opinions by being exposed to things, living in Nicaragua and seeing the bullshit of so-called leftists that I used to romanticize, shit like that.
Yeah, I do. I agree. I was just thinking the thing that real change is from doing, not necessarily from learning per se, but maybe learning by doing. And the last two episodes we had were with Jay and then Jay and JD from the Appalachian. How does it go?
Appalachian Academy of Therapeutic Arts.
Thank you. Appalachian Academy of Therapeutic Arts. And like in some ways, Jay kind of says that he doesn't really pay as much attention to some of the stuff that's going on around, but they are thinking about what are they trying to do. And I think there's some real value to that approach sometimes, of not getting caught up in the glitter.
And there's some sanity in there too, because that's what I've done. Really, like I haven't been as entangled into this shit, and I have anxiety for other reasons now.
Yeah.
And like I'm irritable for other reasons, because again, all this shit being bombarded with is by design. The Trump's actions are by design. The motherfucker, he's not stupid. He's not a fool. He hasn't been where he's been and he's at by being stupid. But at the same time, he's not the almighty person, right? There is a whole system above him. But again, this is all by design. So yes, I think it's a balance, because that's what I've been at, right? Like trying to stay away because I have other stuff to take care of. But I've realized how much like it affects me to just be in it, and because we have to navigate through rabbit holes that is fucking disorienting. And so yes, it's there is a balance somewhere. I'm trying to find it.
Yep, correct.
Andy, do you want to say anything before I conclude?
No, it's good to have you here, Kenny. Thank you. And Eduardo, I'm glad you brought up this topic. And I'm really glad we took the trip down memory lane on that episode 6 years ago. That was a lot of fun.
Yeah, we can take a look at that.
People can make their own opinions as to where we're at now.
Yeah. Well, that does it for this week's episode. What's Left is a weekly political podcast / channel challenging the mainstream left. We post information about our topics and our guests on the episode notes wherever you found this episode, or on our blog on what'sleftpodcast.com. You can find that episode, that site, that link in our episode notes. I remind folks, if you like anything you've heard here, please subscribe, rate, review, turn on your notifications to any of our platforms on Spotify, iTunes Podcast, BitChute, Odyssey, YouTube, Rumble, or Telegram. You can find our blog and any of those links in the episode notes wherever you found this episode. If you would like to give us feedback about something you've heard or suggest something for us to cover, such as some of the listeners have done, you can always do so and contact us through our blog. I'm Eduardo Barca with co-hosts Kenny Cepeda and Andy Lipson. Thank you all for joining us. We'll catch you all for next time. Ciao.